How does trauma cause people to confuse validation with love? And how do they shift from needing approval to self-affirmation?
Two wonderful questions. Where I would start with that, Lisa, would be to me, validation and love are two core needs that every child has. But what happens within complex trauma is a child quickly begins to realize they have to earn love. Love isn't just given, they have to somehow earn it by adapting certain ways to conform to the rules, etc. So there's not unconditional love, it's conditional love. But then that, what they get if they conform is they get validation. And that feels like love. It feels like, oh, I'm getting recognized, I'm getting a sense of value, I'm appreciated, I'm respected. But they're not seeing it's still conditional. It's only if I conform, and now I have to perform in order to get validation, which now is starting to get twisted in their mind. That's what love feels like. So if I get validation, then I feel like I'm being loved. So it's kind of narrowing what love is to validation, but then it's all dependent on I have to perform, and it's all dependent on others must give it to me if I perform. Because what's happening when a child isn't getting the love unconditionally and they realize they have to earn love is they are beginning to believe that something's wrong with me just the way I am. So I'm not worthy of love the way I am being authentic. So I don't like me. I can't validate me because I must not be good enough.
Oh.
So they stop self validation and replace it with criticism. So they develop a strong internal critic that's always finding fault as to why they're not getting love because you did this, because you're not good enough here, because you're not good enough here. So instead of internal validation, they now have internal criticism as the default, the norm. So to change that, what people have to realize, it's not just changing a behavior, it's actually changing a core belief system because the belief system is it is my fault. That's why I wasn't validated. That's why I wasn't loved. I must not be good enough. I must not have value. Those are all lies that you're believing, that you're building your life on a bunch of lies. And so self validation is changing those lies, accepting that who I am is good enough. I don't have to perform. I was actually trying to get love from people who couldn't give me love. I was trying to get love from unsafe people. And so that's where I based all of my equations about relationships and love was with unsafe people. I have to now realize that even though that seemed like the truth, it was actually a lie when it comes to healthy relationships. And I have to be able to get to safe people and begin to develop relationships with them. But I'm not going to probably be successful in building a relationship with a healthy person unless I first build a relationship with myself. And I have to learn to meet my own needs, accept who I am, and when I'm authentic, learn to validate myself, not just criticize myself. And what I would say to people is that's a slow, gradual process. You just don't do that in a day. There's a lot of self awareness that has to develop in that process. There's a lot of just coming to accept parts of you you hated, identifying lies that you believed and replace them with the truth, learning to meet your own needs, learning to actually be your own friend is all part of that process. But what you're doing in all of that process is actually it's an informal type of validation because you're treating yourself as if you matter. You're treating yourself with respect. And that is a form of validation. And then when you require others to treat you with respect, or else I'm not going to have a relationship with you, you're actually validating yourself, not verbally, but through your actions. And that to me is a lot of people, when they think of validation, just think of it as a verbal process, but actually it's more an activity action process in the initial stages. Because what I find for a lot of people, they early, like 30 years ago in therapy, it was look in the mirror and tell yourself how wonderful you are, validate. tell you stuff. And so I would ask clients, how many of you have done that? And they'd all put their hands up. And I'd go, how many of it did that work? And most of them, nope. You're doing verbal validation, but you're not backing it up with action validation. Standing up for yourself, saying, treat me with respect, or I'm not having a relationship with you. That's where the validation has to begin.
That makes so much sense. And that question wasn't mine, but it could have been, because that was definitely my life. And that just answered so many questions I had in my head about that. And that, so validation, and it makes sense, because anytime, if we're going to do something for somebody else, we can talk to them all the time. But if if we don't do the actions, then the words mean nothing, right? So it's the same thing with ourselves. I mean, the way we look at it is we build a relationship with ourselves like we do with others.
Exactly. And what I say to clients all the time is, sadly, what happens in complex trauma is words carry less and less meaning and weight, because parents say, I love you, but they never back it up with actions. And so you begin to mistrust words, that words, they're suspect. Prove it to me by your actions. Otherwise, I just feel hypocrisy all the time. And so that the same happens when we think of validation. We long for verbal validation, but what we have to realize is we actually long to be treated as if we matter. We be treated with respect, that somebody sees us and hears us and understands us. That's validation. And somebody wants to connect with us. That's validation. But that is kind of foreign territory for so many people. So they're
Yeah.
trying to relearn that's really validation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm relearning right here, right now, is just understanding the word validation and what it really means. That it's not, because I've always thought it's just words. Well, not just words, but that's how I took it. Because I actually had a very dear friend, I want to say, validate me verbally for the first time in my life outside of therapy. And I cannot tell you what that did for me.
Right.
But I love that you're sharing that it's the actions, that when someone wants to connect with you, that's validation. When you're treating yourself well, that's validation. And so really starting with, and you're so right about the self-awareness. I preach about that all the time, that you need to have self-awareness for this healing journey, because that's what's really going to help you out. And if you begin to just look at how you're treating yourself, look at what's going on in your head and what you're allowing, and
Yeah.
changing that.
Yeah. And if I can add one other piece to this, so many kids in complex trauma, validating words were actually forms of manipulation. They always had a hidden agenda. So I'm going to say nice things about you to manipulate you, to get,
Mm-hmm.
because I've got an ulterior motive for what I want you to do for me. So that, for many people, as soon as they hear validating words, they go, I wonder what they really want.
Ooh, yeah.
And so there's an immediate on guard suspicion that words never mean what they really say. There's always a hidden meaning and a hidden agenda. And I'm immediately on guard. And so that's where, for most people, they eventually need the healing power of words, but they first need, words are just too scary for them. They need people to treat them with respect.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, I in my first marriage there was a lot of words and not a lot of action, or the actions didn't line up with the words, and I cannot tell you how frustrating that is.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I really got to the point where I didn't trust anybody, what
Yeah,
anybody had to say. I didn't even trust myself.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I've actually had clients say to me, if I give them verbal validation, they look at me and go, what do you want? And I go, I don't want anything. I'm just, yeah, you must want something, because that's the only reason anybody ever validates me. And it's like, wow, that's, so they can't even trust words at all anymore.
Gosh, I didn't even think about that until you said that, and that's so true. That was definitely something that I struggled with, is in trusting people. Are you saying that to me because you really like me? Because with me, I also had a very deep, deep belief system that nobody loved me, because I was told that and believed it. So your words are going to mean absolutely nothing. I even was suspicious of the actions just because of where I was at.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
very,
But I did, what I did do is stop looking outwards for my validation and start validating myself. And you're right, it is a process because I'm still learning. I'm learning today. Look at this.
Yeah. So, like in very simple terms, like one of the things that we encourage people to do is just make lists of what they like about themselves, what they don't. And initially, always the list of what they don't is very long, and what they like is one or two things or even nothing. But then begin to kind of really focus on seeing themselves accurately, because there is a bunch of positives that either you're refusing to see, or nobody's ever acknowledged before, so you don't acknowledge it to yourself. But do that exercise, then ask people that you do trust as safe to do that list on you and see what they say. And you may not initially want to trust it, but but let yourself kind of venture into the risk of trusting that these people do care. There's no ulterior motive, and they're just giving me honest feedback. And gradually you can break down some of the defenses that you've built. And because for many people, they long for validation, but it's almost like they're waterproof to validation. People can pour validation on them, and it's just like water off a duck's back. It doesn't penetrate because they got so many defenses that I'm not worthy of this. I'm bad. Everybody's uses words to manipulate me. So, and so it's starting to open up that waterproofing just a little wee bit, and then it gradually expands from there. But you got to start somewhere.
You do. And one of the things that I've been doing recently that, and I know so many of us survivors do, is we tend to look at the past and look at all of our mistakes and the things that we screwed up on. And I am notorious for doing that. And I'm still forgiving myself for some of the stuff that, my behavior was. But I'm now looking at the things I did right.
Exactly.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked at the things that I'm noticing now that all these years I had blind spots. I definitely had blind spots. And now that I'm like, wow, I did that right. I did that right. I did that right. Wow, this is great, And that has been a really big game changer for me. I mean, even if you start there, start looking at the things you did right because you did something right.
Yeah. When we do staff evaluations, we ask them to do a self-evaluation first and then bring it to the meeting. And it's always interesting to me because in most cases, they go through all the stuff that they're weak in. And then once I look at that and I go, well, here's what I see when I look at you, and I start going through their strengths, they're they're just not sure what to do with that. And so, again, little exercises that begin to invite and open yourself up to accurate mirrors that reflect back to you who you are so important.
Well, yeah, Tim, we probably could go on an hour about this whole thing. I mean, seriously, this is so important in validating ourselves because we can't have the relationships with others that we want, that we desire, without having a healthy, loving relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. Can I add a final thing to this
Absolutely.
before we move on? So I grew up in the era which you grew up in, but it was in a Christian environment where you don't want children to become proud and get a big head. And so you want them to be humble. And the way to make humble children is don't praise them too much. And really what came out of that was we didn't get the necessary healthy validation that we should have got. But what also came out of that was it mistrained our conscience. So now if we give ourselves a compliment, I did a really good job there, we'd automatically feel guilty.
Yeah, we feel like we're being egotistical or something.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I think I'm better than no, I don't. I'm just acknowledging I did a good job. And so you have to retrain your conscience that self congratulatory praise isn't pride, isn't ego. It could become that if you feed it
Sure.
constantly, but there's a huge healthy part to that. Just hey, I did a really good job and I'm proud of myself, and that's okay. And we need to be able to give ourselves permission to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do need to give ourselves permission. And I'm actually doing that. I actually physically go, good
Exactly.
job. Seriously, I do. I do. Like the other day I was reflecting on my past and I was like, "Oh." And I was remembering something, a choice that I made, the right choice, and it was pretty profound and just thinking, "Dang, Lisa, that was good. You know, like these realizations." And then all of a sudden I'm not this, that idea that I was such a, bad person starts to kind of dwindle down. A bad person wouldn't have made that choice.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Tim, this is great. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing this with us.